The helicopter shook so hard that the camera mounted to its side jolted out of focus. Inside the narrow cabin, every sound was amplified, the metal frame groaning against sudden crosswinds, the thump of the rotor blades straining above them, the sharp ping of unsecured objects clattering against the walls. The recycled air was warm, dry, and smelled faintly of oil and sweat. Chris Dalton, the pilot, had both hands tight on the controls. His jaw was locked, his knuckles pale. "Hold steady," he muttered, though it wasn't clear if he was talking to the aircraft, to himself, or to the two people seated behind him. Maria Jenkins, the field reporter, tried to adjust her headset. Her voice wavered as she spoke into the live microphone. "We're bringing you live coverage now over the downtown corridor." Another violent shudder cut her off, the cabin jerking sideways. She flinched, hand pressing against the glass. The city skyline below twisted at an unnatural angle. On the small bench seat, beside her sat Daniel Harper, the cameraman. His camera was fixed forward, still broadcasting despite the turbulence, though the live feed now looked like chaos, blurred shots of flashing lights, tilted rooftops, and the dim interior of the cabin itself. He cursed under his breath, steadying the lens with both hands, sweat dripping from his forehead. The seatbelt sign flickered in the cockpit, though none of them had dared to unbuckle. They were thousands of feet above the streets, their voices crackling across televisions and phones across the state, the story of the storm they were covering abruptly turning into their own. The rotor whined louder. A hollow boom reverberated through the body of the helicopter. Chris shouted, "We've got downdraft! Hang on!" The nose dipped, throwing Maria forward against her straps. Daniel slammed back against the seat, camera jarring. The whole cabin rattled like a tin can in the grip of a giant hand. The fear wasn't abstract. It was physical. The ache in Maria's chest, the dryness in her mouth, the way her heart seemed to knock against her ribs. She thought of her kids back home, 2 states away, and how this wasn't supposed to happen. Not today, not on a routine flight covering a weather story. Chris fought to level the aircraft, but the wind pressed down hard, squeezing them in mid-air. For a moment, the light from outside seemed to change. Something pale and startling bled through the cabin windows, cutting against the storm. It was faint, almost like reflection, but it grew clearer, steadier, seeping into the cockpit itself. Daniel lowered the camera slightly, staring. "Do you see that?" His voice cracked through the headset. Maria's throat tightened. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't the city lights below. The glow hung in front of them, trembling in the air near the windshield. Chris blinked hard, sweat dripping into his eyes, but even he couldn't deny it. Something was there, and it was closer than the storm. The rotor thrashed. Above them, the engine strained, but inside the cabin an uncanny stillness cut through the panic. It was impossible to name what they were seeing, yet none of them could look away. Maria's voice came over the live feed again, quieter, hesitant, but still broadcasting to anyone watching at home. "If you're seeing this with us, stay with us. Don't look away. And if you believe in something greater, don't forget to hold on to it. We're holding on right now. And if you want to walk with us through this, make sure you're with us always. Subscribe, stay connected, because what's happening right now, we can't explain it." The light shifted again, filling the cockpit, and the storm around them seemed to press in even harder. No one breathed, no one spoke. It was just the rattling of the machine, the storm hammering against it, and that impossible glow, steady in the chaos. The helicopter rattled again, a bone-deep shiver running through the fuselage. The sound of the rotor was deafening, the kind of noise that pushed against the chest and made every breath feel short. Yet inside none of them spoke because all three were staring at the same thing, an unexplainable glow that had no source, no reflection, no reason to be inside the cockpit. Chris squinted, one hand on the cyclic, the other clutching the throttle lever as though letting go for even a second would end them. The pale light washed across his face, softening the lines of stress that had been carved there from years of flying. He whispered into the headset, voice low enough that it almost wasn't carried across the frequency. "That's not possible." Maria pressed her hand flat against her chest, feeling the rapid beat of her heart. She wasn't a woman prone to visions. Her life had been deadlines, scripts, cameras, the constant rush of telling other people's stories. But now the story was inside the cabin and she didn't know how to report it. Daniel's camera, still live, caught flashes of the glow whenever he panned near the windshield. The viewers at home, scattered across living rooms and phones, must have been seeing it too, though none of the three inside the helicopter could think about them anymore. Daniel's hands trembled, his voice cracking as he muttered, "That's not the city. That's not lightning." The turbulence hit again, the cabin jerking violently to the side. Metal creaked, the tail boom groaning like it might snap. Chris gritted his teeth, muscles straining as he forced the nose back, toward level. "If we drop another 50 feet, we're done," he barked. But the words were barely out when the glow pulsed brighter, cutting through the flickering red of the warning lights. Maria gasped. It wasn't just light. It had presence. It pressed into the space like a person had stepped into the cockpit. She swallowed hard, every nerve screaming that it couldn't be real, yet her body reacted as if it was. The fear that had been consuming her moments earlier twisted into something else, an overwhelming weight in her chest that made her want to bow her head, though she didn't know why. The helicopter lunged again, but for the briefest second, Maria swore the sound of the storm dulled, just a fraction, just long enough for a breath of calm to reach her ears. Chris blinked fast, shaking his head. His voice cracked through the intercom, half an order, half a confession. "Don't let go. Don't lose it now." He wasn't talking about the controls anymore. Daniel kept his camera steady, though his lips moved silently. Maria caught it out of the corner of her eye. He was praying, quietly, shakily, words too soft to hear, but his lips formed familiar shapes. The glow didn't fade. It grew steadier, as if it had anchored itself against the turbulence that tossed them. Maria found her own lips moving before her mind caught up. A whisper escaped her, raw and broken. "Please, Lord, don't let us go." The helicopter shuddered hard, then steadied again. The storm outside roared, but inside something stronger was holding their attention. For the first time since the turbulence began, Maria realized she wasn't thinking only of survival anymore. She was thinking of faith, not as a story, not as a broadcast line, but as the only thing between them and the ground below. And the glow, whether their eyes could explain it or not, remained. In the control room under the newsroom, a row of monitors showed the same shaking image: tilted skyline, cramped cockpit, a pale light across the windshield. Phones lit the desks. Some asked what the light was. Some asked if the crew was safe. One text said, "I'm praying." In the air, the IFB clicked. Evan, the evening producer, came through, voice smaller than usual. "You're live. We've got you. Stay with it if you can. People are glued." Maria swallowed. The cabin smelled like warm plastic and old coffee. She looked at Daniel, then at Chris. The glow wasn't a shape, but it wasn't glare either. It hung in front of them like something had stepped into the space and refused to leave. "Copy," she said. "We're holding altitude at, Chris?" 2,000, he said. The helicopter shuddered. Wind shear to the east, crabbing left. His calves worked the pedals in small, exact moves. He checked the gauges. Altimeter steady, airspeed low, torque near amber. Daniel held the camera. On the side monitor, the cockpit looked washed in haze. He panned to the instruments, then back to the windshield. "Comments are coming in," he said. "They can see it." Evan returned, hushed. "We're taking calls. A church group's praying on speaker. A paramedic texted from his rig. He's praying too. Half the city's with you." He paused. "Maria, you okay?" "I'm okay." She didn't add. That okay meant gripping one phrase like a handhold. "Lord, don't let us go." She faced the mic. "If you're with us at home, you can hear the storm. We feel it. There's a light in here, and I don't have a technical word for it. We're not making claims. We don't have an explanation. We just know it's here." The helicopter dropped hard, pulling a gasp from all three. A warning chirp cut across the headsets. Chris eased in collective. "Hold," he said. For a breath, the glow brightened and drew clean lines on Chris's face. Daniel's lips moved again. Maria recognized the rhythm. "Jesus, stay with us," he whispered. The rotor hammered the air. The tail boom groaned. The cabin stank of hot electronics and damp fabric. The glow didn't leave. It sat in the cockpit like a quiet promise. In the control room, in apartments and hospital break rooms, people stared at their screens and felt their own breath slow despite the picture. Evan again, barely above a whisper, "We're still with you. Whatever this is, we're here." Chris didn't answer. He flew. He fixed on the gauges and a point above the horizon. The edges of the light kept finding him anyway. Maria spoke because the line was open and the city was listening. "If you're the praying type, we could use it. If you're not, keep us in your thoughts. We're not trying to make a moment out of this. We're just trying to get back." She paused as the frame rattled again. "We're just trying to get back." A gust hit from below, sudden and mean. Something rattled behind the rear bulkhead. Daniel steadied the camera. The glow didn't shift. Maria closed her eyes for a second and let a name form without sound. When she opened them, nothing had changed. The storm roared, the helicopter shivered, the light stayed. And the city watched, waiting for whatever came next. The storm beat harder against the airframe. Rain streaked across the windshield, blurred by the vibration of the wipers. The city below was mostly gone now, hidden under thick cloud. All that was left was the noise of the rotor and the pull of gravity reminding them how far they could fall. Chris's shoulders ached. Every adjustment of the cyclic burned his forearms. He kept his eyes on the artificial horizon, the only steady line in a world that wanted to twist and drop them. He thought of every checklist he'd drilled, every emergency procedure memorized, but none of them covered this. A light in the cockpit, brighter than reflection, steady despite the storm. Maria felt the straps cut against her collarbone. She tried to sit upright, but every dip pressed her deeper into the seat. She wasn't reporting anymore. She wasn't even thinking in headlines. The words on her tongue were older than her career, older than her doubt. "Stay with us. Please stay with us." Daniel shifted, sweat dripping onto the camera's viewfinder. He whispered, "It's still there." His hands trembled as he angled the lens. The glow filled the shot for a moment, before shaking away again. "People are seeing it. They're sending messages." Evan's voice broke through from the newsroom. "Phones are ringing non-stop. Some think it's an angel. Some say it's camera glare. Doesn't matter. They're watching. They're with you." Chris didn't reply. He couldn't spare how. The focus. His jaw locked so tight that a dull ache ran up to his temples. He fought the wind with muscle memory, but in the back of his mind, he kept replaying one thought. "If this is the end, I don't want to face it alone." The helicopter jolted down again. A loose headset slammed against the side wall with a metallic snap. Maria cried out. Daniel cursed under his breath, camera jerking. Chris fought the nose up, hands shaking. And then, for the briefest second, the light pulsed brighter. Not blinding, not violent, but steady, like someone standing too close in the aisle of a darkened church. Maria drew a shaky breath. "Chris," she whispered, "do you feel it?" He didn't answer, but his hand loosened on the cyclic for just an instant, as though some of the fight had left his muscles. The storm still tossed them, but he wasn't alone against it anymore. Daniel lowered the camera into his lap, unable to keep recording. His voice trembled. "I don't care what anyone calls it, I don't feel alone right now." The cockpit settled into silence except for the machine around them. Each of them breathed in rhythm with the noise. Their fear hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. It was still there, sharp and real, but under it was something else. Maria stared at the glow, her throat dry. She didn't try to describe it anymore. She didn't try to explain it. She just let the weight of it press against her and stayed quiet. The helicopter rattled again, but they held steady, for now. The IFB crackled again, then cleared. Evan's voice came through, clipped and controlled. "Chris Tower wants a word, we're patching them." A new voice cut in, calm with a firm edge. News 3, this is approach. We've got cells building to your north. Suggest heading 210 and descend to 1800. Winds variable gusting 35. Say fuel. Chris glanced at the gauge. Approach, News 3, fuel 1 hour 20 minutes. Copy 210 1800. He eased the cyclic and collective, legs working the pedals. The helicopter slid into the new heading, the city lights rising and falling in the wet glass like breathing. Maria wiped sweat from her upper lip with the back of her glove. The cabin smelled like hot plastic and the inside of a raincoat. She tried to remember what she looked like on the shot, but gave up. The camera was bigger than her face right now. The glow still hung where the windshield curved toward the center post, soft like fog, definite, like a person standing close. Daniel adjusted the camera against his shoulder. On the side monitor, the glow edged the instrument panel. Messages scrolled across his tiny screen, thumbed notes from the control room. Viewers say they're praying. A pastor called in. A nurse in ICU is watching on mute. He read them without taking them in. He was fixed on the light and on his own heartbeat thudding under the straps. Approach again. News 3. We've had a microburst reported 4 miles east of your position. Advise caution. Copy caution, Chris said, breathing through his nose in hard, steady pulls. Holding 1800. The rotor beat against the air like a fist on a door. For a second, the left skid felt loose, as if the air had stepped out from under it. Chris worked the pedals and felt the frame tighten back under him. He didn't look at the light. He could feel it on his cheek, like the warmth off a desk lamp. He said it without the mic keyed. If you're here, stay. Maria heard him. She didn't correct him. She didn't put it back into safe words. She faced the lens because the city was still watching. If you're with us, keep us in your prayers, she said. We're listening to approach. We're doing what we can. We're just trying to get home. Her voice was low and raw. She added, not as a cell, but as if she were holding a door for someone, stay with us, stay close. The turbulence hit in a sharp, mean burst that rattled the seat frames. Something behind the rear. Bulkhead banged. The warning chime gave a single angry note. Daniel swore, then went silent. The glow didn't jump or break. It stayed like a steady hand. Evan cut in softly. We can take you down if you want. We can roll tape and come back later. Maria shook her head, even though no one could see it. We're here, she said. We'll stay. Daniel didn't argue. Chris didn't answer. Another voice came on, lower, a little rough. News 3. This is Sky 5 on a parallel. We're west of you. 4 miles at 1600. It's ugly, but there's a pocket by the river. You might ride that down. Chris answered, relief like a small exhale. Sky 5, appreciate it. We're turning for the river. Copy. Watch the gusts off the bridge. They angled toward the black ribbon knifing through the city. Rain stitched the windshield. The wipers squealed across it. The light trimmed the edges of Chris's hands, the curve of the throttle, Maria's jaw. Daniel blinked, and for a second he thought he saw features in it. Gentle lines, the suggestion of eyes. He blinked again, and it was only glow. He didn't chase it. He whispered anyway, a whisper that had a name in it. Jesus. Approach. News 3. Altimeter 2986. Say souls on board. 3, Chris replied. The word hung heavy. He added, because he wanted someone else to hear it, and because he needed to say it out loud. 3 souls on board. The rotor thumped. The air shoved. The skids trembled. The seatbelts dug into bone. The glow held. Maria reached across the space with her voice, not for drama, but because she didn't know what else to do. If you're watching from a hospital, a patrol car, a kitchen table, we feel you with us. Keep praying. We're not out of this. The river widened in the window, a dark sheet lit by weak reflections from the bridges. The helicopter eased down a sliver. Chris's breath stayed measured. The glow rode with them, quiet and unafraid, like someone taking the aisle seat when the plane hits. Rough air. Nothing miraculous happened. The storm didn't split. The wind didn't stop. The instrument stayed jittery. But inside the cockpit, a thin, stubborn calm kept returning, breath by breath, like footsteps you can trust even when the hallway is dark. They held to it. They followed the river like a seam through the storm. Lamps smeared into streaks. The wipers scraped, the rotor hammered above them, and the pedals buzzed under Chris's boots. Approach, News 3 turning 210 along. The river, Chris said. He eased power and felt the skids float, then bite again. Maria's headset pinched. Each breath sounded loud. The cabin smelled like hot plastic, rain, and old coffee. She had stopped writing lines. If you're watching, we're on checklist, we're with approach, we're not alone up here. The last part slipped out. Jesus, stay with us. The glow shifted as the nose dipped, a calm wash across the center post and Chris's shoulder. Daniel framed the instruments, then the river, then Maria's hands, comments stacked in his viewfinder. We can see it. Praying now. It's glare. Hold on. He stopped trying to shape the moment and just stayed with it. Sky 5. Pocket opens south of the West Bridge. Choppy on entry. Copy, Chris said. Lightning? Mostly cloud to cloud. Approach cut over even. News 3. Hospital helipad 2 miles ahead is open. Winds 30 at 28 gusts 35. Equipment on standby. Say intentions. Request vectors to the hospital pad, Chris said. Turn left heading 195, maintain 1600, report the pad in sight. Maria exhaled. Daniel kept rolling. The glow held in front of the windshield, steady. It sat there like someone taking the front row and refusing to leave. Chop hit. The left skid dropped, then the right. A loose headset banged behind the bulkhead. Chris rode it through. That's the burst, he said. Stay with me. Evan's voice was low. Hospital cameras live. They know you're coming. People are calling to pray while they wait. The hospital rose through the rain, the white H barely visible. The glow edged the instruments clean, like a hand on a photo. Daniel didn't know if any of this would look sane later. He didn't care. I'm scared, he whispered, then quieter. But I'm not alone. Maria spoke, small. If you've got someone in ICU, we're thinking of you. If you're driving a rig or in a patrol car, we hear you. If you never pray and you're doing it now, we're with you. We don't know what this light is. We know how it feels. She let the words sit. We're going to try to put down. Approach. News 3. Winds now 280 at 32, gusts 38. Caution microburst near the pad. Fire and med team standing by. Chris trimmed. Copy. The helicopter settled, then held. The storm pressed on the cabin like a hand. The glow didn't blink. He briefed. Pocket west of the tower, then final. Maria, tight. Dan, if it goes bad, drop the camera and hold the seat. Daniel nodded. He would let it go. Maria closed her eyes. Jesus, stay with us. The pad came through the rain as a square of light. The rotor beat found a human rhythm, hard and determined. The wind shoved. The light stayed. They were not safe. They were not lost. They were somewhere between, held by training, muscle, and a quiet presence no checklist could name. And they kept coming down. The helipad was a pale square in the storm, lit by weak floodlights that flickered under sheets of rain. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it looked small, too small for the fight they were in. Chris lowered the collective, voice sharp. Coming down! Watch the crosswind! His knuckles had gone bloodless against the cyclic. The rotor howled, straining. The gauges danced, needles twitching as if the storm had hands inside the panel. Maria clutched her straps tighter. The pressure in her chest wasn't only fear anymore. It was weight, like every word she hadn't spoken to her kids, every night she'd worked. Instead of calling home, she whispered fast, words tumbling, Jesus, forgive me. Jesus, keep us, please. Daniel pressed the camera against his shoulder one last time. The view was chaos, windshield wipers jerking, floodlights stuttering, the cockpit rattling like loose bolts might give way. And yet in the middle of the shot the glow stayed, calm as a breath. His voice broke into the mic. If you're still watching, we can't fake this. We're not actors. We're not in control. We don't know why. This light hasn't left us. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. But it hasn't. Approach cut in. Controlled but tense. News 3, winds now 330 at 38. Pad is slick. Advise if unable. Chris muttered into the headset. Not unable, just unwilling to quit. He guided the helicopter down through the gusts, fighting every inch. The skids shook, metal screaming against invisible fists of air. For a heartbeat, the whole cabin dropped like the ground had vanished, and Maria cried. Out. The straps locked and her chest slammed against them. The glow brightened, not blinding, not sudden, just steady, just present. Chris felt it against his cheek, like warmth on the side of his face. For the first time since the storm caught them, his jaw unclenched. Easy, he said, though the voice was less for the controls than for the others. Easy. The pad rose closer, but the gusts came meaner. The rotor disc tilted. The helicopter swung left, tail boom yawing. Chris corrected hard, pedals kicking. The wind shoved again, this time from below, lifting them when they needed to descend. Daniel slammed his palm against the frame, eyes wild. We're not going to make it. Hold, Chris shouted, forcing the nose back down. I said hold! Maria's voice cracked raw through the headset. God, if you're here, show us you're here. Her words weren't rehearsed, weren't professional. They were bare. They cut across the live feed, reaching anyone still watching in silence. And as if in response, the glow didn't flicker. It stayed. The storm didn't vanish. The turbulence didn't stop. The gauges still shook, but the glow didn't leave them. Maria sobbed once, sharp and sudden, not out of terror, but because for a heartbeat she believed, fully, painfully, that they weren't abandoned. Chris steadied the nose. The pad swam into clearer view. They weren't safe yet, but they were closer. And for the first time, he let the words out of his chest. Jesus, fly with me. The rotor thumped. The rain hit harder. The glow stayed. And the ground, after all that chaos, began to feel near again. The helipad lights blurred behind the streaks of rain. Every gust slammed into the airframe like a shove from an angry hand. Chris wrestled the cyclic, his shoulders aching. His vision narrowed to the trembling horizon line and the small square of light waiting below. Coming down, 10 feet at a time, he said, though his voice cracked with the strain. Maria held the straps across her chest so tight her knuckles burned white. Her headset hummed with background static, each crackle like a warning. She whispered without meaning to broadcast, "Don't let us go. Don't let us go." Daniel tried to keep the camera up, but the lens knocked against his shoulder with every jolt. He dropped it into his lap, too afraid to lose grip of the seat. His lips moved again, silent, repeating the same name over and over. Approach's voice cut through, steady but urgent. News 3, winds gusting. 43, you're drifting left. Correct immediately. I see it, Chris barked. His calves strained against the pedals. The helicopter tilted, the skids angling unevenly toward the pad. Rain pounded the windshield, each drop like a hammer against glass. The rotor groaned, an ugly, strained sound that made Maria's stomach flip. And yet, through all of it, the glow remained, clear against the center post. Not spreading, not fading, just steady. Chris glanced at it once, quick, and something in him unclenched. You're still here, he muttered. The helicopter dipped hard. A skid clipped the edge of turbulence, and for a second it felt like they were falling sideways. Maria screamed, her throat raw. Daniel pressed his face into his shoulder strap, but the nose leveled. Chris forced it back. Sweat stung his eyes, ran down his jaw. He clenched the controls and yelled, not at the storm, not at the machine, but at whatever was listening. I can't do this alone. The glow brightened, not sudden, not theatrical, just stronger. Enough to draw sharp lines on the dials, enough to light the hollow fear in their faces. Maria sobbed once, her words cracking over the live feed. We see you. We need you. She didn't even realize she'd said it aloud. The pad drew closer, square and waiting. Gusts shoved them sideways again. Chris fought, 1 inch at a time, muscles screaming. The rotor hammered, tail yawed, but the nose stayed on target. 5 feet, he shouted. The cabin rattled like it would shake itself apart. The smell of hot wiring filled the air. The warning light flicked amber. Maria closed her eyes, whispering so fast it was almost breath. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. The skids kissed air just above the pad. A gust shoved them left. Chris corrected, heart pounding in his throat. "Hold!" he yelled. The glow pressed closer, like a hand on his shoulder, like breath beside his ear. He didn't look. He didn't need to. And the helicopter steadied. For one long moment, it hovered above. The pad shaking, screaming, but not falling. And in that fragile balance, each of them felt it. Fear, yes, but also a presence that would not leave them. They weren't safe. Not yet. But they were not alone. The skids hovered inches above the glowing H rain lashed sideways across the pad, running off in streams that looked like veins of silver. The helicopter thumped against invisible fists of wind, fighting to throw them off. Hold it," Chris said through clenched teeth. His arms burned, sweat rolling into his eyes. His headset crackled with Approach's voice. "News 3, you're unstable. Advise go around." "Negative," Chris snapped. "We're staying." His boots shook against the pedals, thighs cramping. Every part of his body wanted to let go, but something in him pushed back. Maria had both hands pressed against her chest, as if holding her heart in place. She stared through the windshield at the blur of lights and water. "God, let us touch ground," she whispered. It wasn't a broadcast line anymore. It was desperate, stripped bare. Daniel's camera dangled by its strap. He had both fists gripping the seat edge. His eyes flicked to the glow. For the first time, he spoke it out loud, not as a whisper, but clear enough that the mic caught it. "Jesus, don't leave us." The cabin jolted left. The skid slammed hard against the pad, metal scraping. Chris shoved the opposite pedal, pulled collective, and the helicopter lurched back into the air a foot above the deck. Warning chimes wailed. Maria gasped, her breath a sob. "We're not going to make it." Chris's voice came back raw but fierce. "Yes, we are. Hold on." He stared at the instruments, then past them, to the steady glow that hadn't once flickered. He drew strength from it like fuel. "We're not alone, not now." Another gust shoved them nose first. Chris corrected hard, muscles screaming. The rotor thumped so loud the cabin vibrated against their bones. And then the skids kissed concrete again, softer. This time, they slid an inch, scraping, then caught. The whole frame shuddered. "Down, down!" Chris shouted. He dropped the collective, pressing the skids into the pad. For a heartbeat, the helicopter tilted as if it might roll. Maria screamed. Daniel shut his eyes. The glow held steady, the skids leveled. Metal groaned, then settled. The rotor whined, still thrashing the rain, but the cabin stopped rocking. They were down, shaking, trembling, alive. Chris let out a sound that was half a sob, half a laugh. His hands shook violently, still locked on the controls. "We're on the pad," he said. Maria's chest heaved. She pressed her forehead to the straps, whispering, "Thank you, thank you." Daniel lifted the camera with trembling fingers. The lens framed the cockpit, the dripping windshield, the pale glow still hanging in the air. His voice cracked as he spoke. "If you've been watching this whole time, we made it down. And I swear to you, we didn't do it alone." No one in the cabin corrected him. Not Chris, not Maria. None of them could deny it. The storm raged on. The rotor spun, beating the rain into mist. But inside the cockpit, for the first time, there was stillness. The skids groaned against wet concrete, but they held. The rotor still clawed at the storm, spraying mist across the pad. Chris's arms twitched from the effort of holding the controls steady, but the hardest part was over. For the first time in what felt like hours, the helicopter wasn't falling. Floodlights from the hospital roof cut through the sheets of rain. Figures in reflective jackets sprinted toward them, bent low against the wind. Their boots slapped water as they ran, helmets gleaming in the glow. Chris finally eased the throttle back. The rotor slowed, each beat duller, weaker, until it was only a tired whine above them. He sat back, chest heaving, sweat running into his collar. His fingers twitched when he tried to release the cyclic. Maria's headset slipped from her head as she lowered her face into her hands. The straps dug into her shoulders, but she didn't care. Her breaths came in ragged sobs, half relief, half disbelief. She whispered over and over, "Thank you, thank you." Daniel lifted the camera again with trembling hands. He framed the shot of the rescuers approaching, lights reflecting in the rain, but his voice cracked as he said into the mic, "We're on the ground. We're safe." He swallowed, emotion thick. And the light? He stopped himself. He didn't need to finish, because even with the rotor slowing, even with boots clattering outside and shouts muffled by the storm, the glow still lingered inside the cockpit. Calm, steady, faint, but there. The first rescuer reached the door, tugging it open with wet gloves. Cold rain rushed inside. "You okay?" he shouted, his voice loud over the storm. Chris managed a nod. His throat was tight, words caught. 3 souls on board. We're alive. Maria raised her head, eyes wet. She gripped the rescuer's sleeve as though to anchor herself. "We shouldn't be," she said. Her voice shook. "But we are." The man didn't understand. He just helped her unclip the belt. Another rescuer pulled Daniel out, steadying him as he stumbled onto the pad. Daniel kept the camera pointed back at the helicopter, even as his knees wobbled. Chris climbed out last, boots hitting slick concrete. His legs nearly buckled. He looked back once into the cockpit. The glow was still there, faint now, but real. He pressed a shaking hand to the cold metal skin of the helicopter and muttered under his breath, "I know what I saw." The rescuers hustled them toward the stairwell, shouting instructions over the storm. Behind them, the helicopter sat beaten and dripping, but intact. Inside, the glow lingered for a moment longer before fading with the slowing of the rotor, leaving only shadows and rain. Maria glanced back once more before the stairwell swallowed them. Her lips trembled, but the words came clear. He was with us, and none of them corrected her. The stairwell reeked of wet concrete and disinfectant. Boots thudded on each step as the rescuers guided them down. Chris's legs shook so badly he had to grip the railing. Maria kept one hand over her chest, the other clutching the sleeve of the medic leading her. Daniel carried the camera pressed to his side like a fragile organ. At the base of the stairs, sliding doors opened to a flood of light. Nurses, orderlies, and paramedics filled the lobby, their eyes fixed on the 3 figures stumbling inside. Some clapped once, awkwardly, unsure. Others just stared. A nurse whispered, "That's them. That's the crew from the feed." Maria's hair clung to her cheeks, drenched. She tried to straighten, but her knees buckled, and a nurse caught her elbow. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook. "We're fine." Chris sat heavily on a bench, chest still heaving. His hands trembled in his lap. A paramedic pressed a blanket over his shoulders, but it wasn't warmth he needed. It was stillness. He looked at the floor, whispered something no one caught. Daniel slumped beside him, staring at the tiny screen of the camera. The final frame was frozen on the cockpit glow, pale against the instruments. His thumb hovered over the playback button, but he couldn't press it. He already knew what he'd seen. Newsroom voices filled their headsets again, faint from the IFB still hanging loose around their necks. Evan's voice was tight, rushed. "You're safe. Everyone saw it. Calls haven't stopped. Half the city's awake talking about it. Some say it was just glare, some say it was God. Doesn't matter. They saw it with you." Maria pulled the headset off, laid it on her lap. She looked up at the nurses gathering, their faces pale with questions. Her throat burned. "We didn't imagine it," she said, voice raw. "There was something there. I don't care what word you use. But he was there." The lobby hushed. Even the storm outside seemed quieter in that moment. Chris finally lifted his head. His eyes were rimmed red. "I've flown through storms worse than this," he muttered, voice rasping. "Lost friends to the air. Tonight should have been another name on a wall. But it wasn't." His lips pressed tight. "We weren't alone." No one argued. The nurses looked at each other. One paramedic crossed himself quietly. Daniel set the camera down on the bench, his hands free for the first time in hours. He rubbed his face, then whispered, "I've never prayed like that in my life, and I felt He stopped, unable to finish. He shook his head hard. Maria reached over, placing her hand on his arm. "You don't need to explain it," she said. "We all felt it." The storm still howled against the windows. The rotor above the pad slowed into silence. But inside the lobby there was a different weight now, not terror, not chaos. A quiet that none of them had expected, but all of them recognized. They had survived, but survival wasn't the headline anymore. They were moved into a small consultation room off the emergency ward. The walls were white, the air heavy with antiseptic and rain-soaked clothes. A nurse brought towels and bottles of water. None of them drank. Their hands were too unsteady to twist the caps. Chris sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, face buried in his palms. He hadn't spoken since they left the lobby. Maria sat beside him, towel draped over her shoulders, staring at the floor. Daniel placed the camera on the table as though it was something dangerous. The little green light still blinked, waiting to be switched off. Evan's voice burst from the headset lying between them. "You three need to give me something. Phones haven't stopped. Social feeds are full of clips. Everyone's demanding answers." Chris finally lifted his head. His face was pale, lined with exhaustion. "Answers?" He laughed once, bitter. "We barely made it down. I don't have answers." "You don't have to explain it," Evan pressed, voice tight. "Just tell them what you saw." Maria leaned back, her throat dry. "What we saw, that's easy. We saw a light in the cockpit that didn't belong to the storm, didn't belong to the city. It was there, steady, when everything else was chaos." Her voice wavered. "And I know what I felt. I felt like we weren't alone." Silence followed. Then Evan's sigh. "You know what that sounds like on air, right? Half will say it's a miracle. Half will say you lost it up there. Everyone will have an opinion." Daniel finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Let them. I'm done shaping it for them. We know what happened." He pressed his hands together, trembling. "I prayed for the first time since I was a kid, and I swear, someone was with us." Chris rubbed his face hard, then stood. His knees wobbled, but he steadied himself. "I don't care how it sounds. I've flown 20 years. I know glare. I know reflections. That wasn't glare. That wasn't a trick of the glass. If they want my report, that's it." Maria looked between the two men, her lips pressed tight. She wasn't a preacher. She wasn't someone who leaned on faith in her broadcasts. But tonight, stripped of everything polished, she couldn't deny it. "We don't need to convince anyone," she said softly. "We just need to tell it true." Outside the small room, the storm still clawed at the windows. The city was awake, buzzing with debate, with disbelief, with awe. But inside, the three of them sat in silence, breathing the same heavy air, bound, not by what they'd covered as reporters, but by what they'd lived as survivors. Daniel reached forward and finally turned off the camera. The green light blinked out. He let his hand rest on the casing and whispered one last thing, not to the others, but to the memory of that cockpit. "Thank you." No one corrected him. No one laughed. They just let the words stay in the room. By morning, the storm had moved east, leaving the city wet and raw under pale light. But the storm inside the newsroom had only grown louder. Maria sat on a hospital cot, sipping from a paper cup of coffee gone lukewarm. She scrolled her phone with a trembling thumb. Headlines blared across the screen. News crew claims mysterious light in cockpit, miracle or malfunction. Live broadcast sparks debate. Chris stood at the window, arms crossed tight. He hadn't changed out of the flight suit. His boots left muddy prints on the tile. "They're calling us crazy," he said flatly. "Half of them." Daniel leaned against the wall, the camera bag at his feet. "And the other half?" Chris turned, jaw tight. "They're calling it divine, a miracle. They're making it a spectacle." Maria lowered the phone. "It was never about spectacle." Her voice cracked, raw from the night before. "We weren't trying to prove anything. We were just trying to live." The door pushed open. Evan stepped in, tie loose, eyes bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept either. They want interviews, national outlets, local stations, even podcasts. Everyone wants a piece of the three of you. Chris shook his head immediately. No. Evan spread his hands. You don't have to sell it. Just tell your truth. But they're not going to stop asking. Daniel finally spoke, voice low. We can't give them what they want. They want certainty. They want answers tied in a bow. All we can give is what we saw. He looked at the floor, then back up. And what we felt. Evan hesitated. Then at least agree on how you'll say it. Because right now, the world's talking about you more than the storm you went up to cover. Silence filled the room. The air smelled of damp clothes and antiseptic. Maria set down the coffee, stood slowly. Her body ached, as if she'd been hit by a truck. We don't need to argue about what people call it. We don't need to debate with skeptics or try to convert anyone. All we can do is speak plain. We were in the cockpit. We were drowning in fear. And then there was light. And in that light, we weren't alone. Chris rubbed his temples. He didn't like the attention, didn't want microphones shoved in his face, but he couldn't deny what she'd said. That's it, he muttered. That's the only truth I've got. Daniel nodded, eyes damp. Me too. Evan exhaled slowly, then gave a short nod. All right, then that's what you'll say. He started for the door, then paused. Just know, whatever you tell them, some will believe you, some will mock you, but none of them will forget what they saw last night. The door clicked shut. Maria, Chris, and Daniel sat in the quiet again, bound together by something they couldn't name. The noise outside grew louder with each headline, each comment thread, each broadcast. But inside, in their shared silence, the truth remained unshaken. What happened in the cockpit was theirs, before it was anyone else's story. The studio lights were hotter than the cockpit had been. Bright panels hung above the chairs, bleaching every line of fatigue on their faces. Maria sat in the middle, Chris too. Her left, Daniel to her right. None of them had slept more than a few hours since the landing. The host leaned forward, a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for joining us. The footage you aired has been seen by millions. The question everyone is asking is simple. What happened in that cockpit? Maria cleared her throat. Her hands twisted in her lap. We were flying over the storm, live on the air. The turbulence was severe, worse than anything I've felt. And then, there was a light. Not from outside, not from our equipment. It was just there. It stayed, even when the storm tried to tear us apart. The host nodded slowly. And you believe this was divine? Maria hesitated. She glanced at Chris. He gave the smallest shake of his head, not denial but caution. She turned back to the camera. I can't label it for everyone. All I can tell you is what we lived. In that moment, I prayed. And I wasn't the only one. We felt we weren't alone. Daniel leaned forward, his voice, himself, low but steady. I haven't prayed since I was a kid, but up there with the skid scraping concrete and the wind trying to roll us, I prayed. I called out, and something answered, not with words, just by being there. The host shifted her gaze to Chris. And you, Captain Dalton? You're a veteran pilot. Do you think it was just glare, stress, a trick of the eyes? Chris's jaw tightened. He hated cameras, hated this spotlight, but he forced himself to look into the lens. I know glare. I know stress. This wasn't either. I can't tell you how to name it, but I'll tell you this. Without that presence, I don't think we'd be sitting here. The studio went quiet for a beat too long. The host recovered with a quick shuffle of notes. Viewers are divided. Some say it was divine, others call it hysteria. Some say you're exploiting fear. What do you say to them? Maria exhaled slowly. We're not selling anything. We're not asking anyone to believe us. We're just saying, we were there. And in the worst moment of our lives, something greater than us was with us. She swallowed. You can call it what you want. We call it grace. The interview moved on to safer questions. weather, recovery, the storm's damage, but the weight of their testimony lingered. The lights burned, the cameras rolled, but all three felt the same thing. The story wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone who had watched, prayed, or doubted. And yet, privately, beneath the glare of national attention, it remained, deeply, stubbornly theirs. Days later, the noise began to fade. The headlines shifted back to politics, markets, and sports. Clips of the broadcast still floated around, replayed on phones and in church basements, debated in college classrooms and diner booths. But for Chris, Maria, and Daniel, the world's chatter was background. What mattered was what stayed with them when the lights and microphones turned off. Chris returned to the hangar first. The helicopter sat roped off, still scarred by the storm. Paint scraped, rotor blades flecked with grime, skids bent slightly from the hard landing. He stood in the doorway, arms folded. The machine looked ordinary, just metal and wiring, yet he knew it had carried something more that night. He placed his hand on the cool skin of the fuselage and whispered, "I'll never forget." No checklist, no log entry could hold what had happened, but he carried it. Maria went home to her kids. They didn't ask about the broadcast. They had seen enough on their own screens. Instead, they wrapped their arms around her, clinging as if afraid she might still be lost in the storm. She held them tighter than she ever had, her voice breaking as she told them, "I'm here. I'm here because he was there." That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, phone buzzing with missed calls, and let herself cry, not from fear, but from gratitude. Daniel stayed longest in the newsroom, reviewing footage frame by frame. He paused on the glow, freezing it on the screen. To some, it looked like glare. To him, it looked like the answer to the prayer he hadn't known how to say until that cockpit. He pressed delete on the extra takes, leaving only the raw broadcast, untouched. When Evan asked why, Daniel said simply, "It speaks for itself." The three didn't meet often in the weeks after, but when they did, words weren't needed. A nod, a look was enough. They had lived through something no comment section could define. On a Sunday evening, weeks later, Maria sat in the back pew of a small church. No cameras, no scripts, just wood, light, and quiet. She bowed her head. The storm, the rotor, the rattling of the cabin still echoed in her memory, but stronger than all of it was the stillness she had felt in the glow. She whispered into the silence, "I don't need proof, I just need you." And in that quiet, as ordinary as recycled air, as real as the smell of rain-soaked clothes, she felt again what she had felt that night. She wasn't alone. For Chris, for Maria, for Daniel, the encounter would never be captured by headlines or explained by panels of experts. It wasn't about convincing anyone else. It was about the truth etched into their bones. Thousands of feet in the air, in a cockpit rattling like it would tear apart. They had been given something no storm could take, the certainty that in their darkest hour they hadn't been abandoned. And that truth, quiet, steady, and unforgettable, would carry them through every flight, every broadcast,